We have with us, as part of our environmental education workshops here in Meadowthorpe, Will Mahoney. He's with Thrive Organics and will present information, I believe, which is an alternate to commercial fertilizers that you would get at like Lowe's and Home Depot, which might be a little more environmentally friendly, and perhaps he'll talk a little bit about their role in lawn care and how they might be beneficial. And Will, I'm going to ask you to say a little bit about your background and how you got where you are as part of the introductory. And let's move on. We've got a few guests with us that are going to listen, and we may have a few questions for you. So with that, thank you for coming. And
sounds great. Well, thanks for having me. Well, first of all, people always ask, you know, what's my background? Am I a chemist? Am I, you know, do I have a degree in agriculture or something else like that? And no, I have a degree in social work. So I'm absolutely qualified to do this. Now, I grew up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming, so grew up around agriculture and have experience with pesticides in that regard and herbicides and that sort of thing. And then it became more of just a curiosity, especially after I had children. And I tend to be one of those persons who gets eaten up by mosquitoes. And my children did as well. So when they got old enough to want to be in the yard all of the time, I called a pest control company and I said, what can we do? And they came over and said, well, we can get rid of the mosquitoes and the chiggers and that sort of thing, and gave me a price. And they said, now, you can't be on your lawn for 2 days, and we have to warn the neighbors 2 houses on each side about chemical drift, but it's totally safe. So I started, really, I thought, no thank you, said no thank you, and started doing a lot of research on my own to find an alternative to pesticides. And it really didn't take long to find that there are some great products out there that are organic and natural on the pesticide end of things. And then I started looking at the lawn care aspects from a fertilizer standpoint as well. And again, found out through lots of available research out there that there are lots of products and processes and methods of taking care of your lawn in a more natural way without using the harsh chemicals. And of course, I also found lots of evidence of what the chemicals do to people and animals and to plants and to our environment, to our water, which was a wake-up call, to say the least. So I have, since that time, 7 or 8 years ago, I've actually invented some organic pesticides and insect repellents and developed some fertilizer as well. And I've done some lawn care in my time, and then I also have another business where I recycle large tires into water storage for livestock and things like that. So I'm kind of in the environmental sector, and that's my business and my experience. But we're here today to talk about natural lawn care and pest control and some of the alternatives to what is just commonly permeates our society and how we take care of our lawns and gardens. I say we have a chemical problem, and we really do have a chemical problem. And this goes from residential lawn care all the way through production and agriculture. When petrochemicals were developed into fertilizers and pesticides, it was seen as the best thing since sliced bread. And the government was behind it, and media was behind it, and so it really became the thing to do for people. And especially starting in the kind of mid-70s and then especially in the 80s, the incidence or the amount of paid lawn services increased exponentially, about 600% in the 80s alone. So we went from a lawn not being that important, and you know, we mow and take care of things, and a lot of times people wanted clover in their lawns, to now where it's very carefully manicured and a lot of time and effort and money is spent on having the perfect lawn, and you don't want anything like a dandelion or a clover in there, when those used to be actually the best things that people wanted were dandelions and clover. So a lot has changed just in the way we look at things. Now when we use chemicals, the problem is, and I'm not anti-chemical or anything, I definitely think there's a time and place for chemicals, and some chemicals are very beneficial to us. But when we use chemicals, especially as a fertilizer, they tend to be pretty hot. And what I mean by that is when you look at the NPK number, the N tends to be very high. Tends to be like 20 to 40, somewhere in there for a lawn application. And a lot of that is urea-based. Some of it comes from other sources as well. And I say it's hot because it is literally hot. The same product is used to de-ice in the wintertime. It actually melts the ice. Well, what happens when we put that in the soil are two things. Number one, it's very water soluble. So in other words, if whatever the plant can't use pretty immediately is washed into our water supply. And a plant doesn't need anywhere near 40 nitrogen. And it can't use it that fast. A plant can use anywhere from like 2 to 10 is actually a healthy range. And you really want to look for water insoluble nitrogen, something that's going to bond to the soil and be used by the plant as opposed to being washed down the stream. The other problem with the fertilizer being so hot is that it literally kills the organic matter in the soil. And so we end up having a drug-dependent lawn or garden. And it requires more and more of the same thing, needs more drugs, needs a higher fix to continue to look as good as it did. Question?
Is that why lawn care companies have to have 6 and 7 applications during the season?
That's exactly right. And often when they start, you don't need that many. But as you go along, you need more and more. It's literally like an addict. Okay, so we're making our lawns chemically dependent. And it's like another way to look at it, I see as plastic surgery. You know, if you get a little nip here and a little tuck there, it looks pretty good for a while. But if you keep having nips and tucks, and as you get older, pretty soon that doesn't start to look so good. You need more and more to keep up the appearance. And that's sort of the same thing with lawn care. Pesticides are the same thing. They harm the environment. They wash right down the streams. They kill everything indiscriminately for the most part. And almost all chemical pesticides are neurotoxins. And the companies will say, well, they're safe and they degrade really quickly in the environment. And to some degree that's true. But there's also tons of evidence of neurological problems with people, diseases, neurological diseases, as well as cancers that are found in pets and people who use the pesticides in the lawn care products. And a lot of times the popular product for the companies is a weed and feed, so you're getting both at the same time. You're getting the herbicide, you're getting the fertilizer, and sometimes there's a pesticide in there as well. So chemicals kill the natural organic life, creates a chemical addiction, which we've already talked about, and the plants become more and more unhealthy over time. Chemicals pollute the groundwater, that cause algae takeover and poison aquatic life. Here's a picture of an algae bloom. When that excess nitrogen gets washed into the water, we have lots of algae problems. And we have water that ends up turning green like this. There's also lots of evidence of mutations in aquatic animals, especially things like amphibians, frogs especially, that are very sensitive to chemicals. So we start to see those kinds of problems. The most popular herbicide in weed and feed is 2,4-D, and it is statistically significantly linked to lymphoma in people, and it's also linked to behavior and learning disabilities. And especially the chemical atrazine, which is the pesticide most commonly used in corn production, is found to have a link there. In fact, there's a physician in central Kentucky who shall remain nameless, but he actually has built a practice treating people with what looks like ADHD and Tourette syndrome and some of those kinds of syndromes. And what he does is take corn out of their diet, and suddenly they're fine. Because the atrazine has a huge effect on developing people, young children. Now, that's not to say those conditions don't legitimately exist in the environment, but there's clearly a connection there. Okay, are there natural alternatives, and are they effective? Absolutely yes, and we're going to cover several alternatives for lawn care specifically, going from kind of the least radical to the most radical. There's natural weed and feed product. So if you want to just kind of replace what you're doing chemically with a more natural, environmentally friendly product, that's available out there. This was the best product I've found was developed by a fella in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he's been using it for 20 years and has a thriving business doing this. And I've used his products myself, and they work very well. And he markets himself as edible lawn care. Everything is feed grade, and everything is also EPA exempt. In other words, it's generally regarded as safe and not regulated. It doesn't have to be licensed. You can see the number there is 805. What you'll tend to see in chemical products is 20 to 40 as that first number, and again, that gets washed down the stream. The 805 is actually a pretty reasonable number, and we can actually go lower when we go on, and we'll see that. And then the weed part of this is citric acid, is an amazing selective herbicide. And they combine that with sodium lauryl sulfate, which is a common ingredient in shampoo. And it actually works very well. Now, you'll hear people say, well, natural, I've tried this and I've tried that. Natural just never works, or it doesn't work as well or nearly as fast. And especially early in the growth of natural products, that was true. But that is not so much true anymore. The products have developed to a point where they're actually quite effective, and some of the products are actually more effective and quicker acting than the chemical products. What you do with this is you spray your lawn with this. It actually is genius because grass grows vertically and has a thin blade generally, and weeds tend to be broadleaf and grow horizontally. And the citric acid ruptures the cell structure in the weeds and causes them to shrink away. It doesn't kill them all immediately, but they shrink naturally and disappear, and the grass thrives. So that's kind of how that works. It works very well.
Excuse me, would you explain the 8, 0, and 5 numbers in the
I will. That's
context,
8, 0, and 5. The 3 numbers are NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the nitrogen is the real fuel for the plant. In terms of the food, the others are nutrients that make them have stronger stems and so on. The potassium is 0, the phosphorus is 0 here, and one of the things we were talking about before was that the water company already injects that into the system anyway, and so if you throw that into your fertilizer as well, you tend to have an overabundance of that, and of course that gets washed into the groundwater. Okay, moving up to a little more radical here, where you're not actually putting down a herbicide, is the natural fertilizing and manual weeding. If you need to, a lot of people have kind of gone back to where a dandelion, hey, that's kind of pretty, and may look a little ragged once in a while, but it's okay. But anyway, great fertilizers are worm castings and hydrolyzed fish. And I'll say something about the hydrolyzed fish because people go, ooh, I'm going to spray rotten fish on my lawn. Doesn't sound too appetizing. If you get, there's some products out there, one in particular is called Neptune's Harvest. There's some others as well, that they are cold processed and they're pH neutral, so they don't rot and they don't stink. And it's quite an amazing product. It's fish, and you can actually get a fish seaweed blend. And the number on this, you can tell we're getting more radical here. The nitrogen number is 2 instead of 8, so we're already down even a lot more. And again, this is more water-insoluble nitrogen that bonds to the soil and is used by the plant as opposed to washed down our streams. So when you get hydrolyzed fish, there are other products out there, but you do want to get something that's cold processed and pH neutral, otherwise it will not smell too great. So, and there are products also where they boil the fish to get to, well, and what happens is that destroys the nutrients. So you really want to get something that's cold processed. And these are great for lawn and garden. They're not going to, you're not going to have that immediate jump in green and growth like you do with the chemicals, because again, it's not essentially a narcotic injection. It's a natural food. And you'll definitely see a difference in your lawn, and plants in general will be healthier over time. In fact, just a little evidence here, there's tons of evidence that you can find, testimonials and university studies online. People who go to a hydrolyzed fish product in row crops, whether it's alfalfa or sweet corn or whatever it is, over a few years will experience double the yields and healthier, longer shelf life products than they find with using chemicals. All right, here's your most radical step. Get off the grass and into the clover. A grass lawn is really a modern invention. It wasn't too long ago when people's lawns were either clover and dandelions or they were hard-packed earth with nothing. And so it's kind of a modern invention. Now I'm all in favor of having a nice soft carpet under my feet if I go out in the yard. So, but grass is really an inefficient plant. It is very labor, nutrient, and water intensive. It takes a lot to keep it up. A clover is an amazing plant because it's low growing, it's naturally resistant to drought, requires less water, less fertilizer. It's a legume, which means that it takes nitrogen from the atmosphere and actually injects it into the soil. So it actually improves, it self-fertilizes and helps the grass or anything else that's mixed in with it to grow. It is a dense cover, so it requires less weeding. Weeds can't get through that very well. It doesn't take much or any artificial watering. It does very well just with rainwater. And mowing is fantastic because it doesn't grow very high if you get the right kind. And there's several great kinds that have been developed for lawns. White clover is the most common. Red clover you can also use. And there's a new type that's been developed called micro clover. And I don't really have any experience with it, but it's a neat product. It's a smaller, kind of denser design for lawns. So clover is a fantastic alternative. Now, obviously, if you plant clover, you can't do a selective herbicide because it will attack the clover. Okay, now we're going to talk here just a little bit about pesticides because that's also often wrapped up in the lawn care and the fertilizer. Pesticides, almost all of them, chemical pesticides are neurotoxins. And you'll have people say, well, it's just a little bit and it really is just enough to kill the insects. Well, the problem is a neurotoxin is really a neurotoxin for everything. And it might be in tiny amounts, but it's still neurotoxic. I was reading a study by the University of Ottawa in Canada. In 1 year, I can't remember which year it was, maybe 2007, just in that one province, they had over 1,700 reported cases of pesticide poisoning. Okay, and that's not from somebody dumping it on themselves. That's from people experiencing it as a mist being applied or just in the grass and so on. So pesticides are concretely linked to multiple cancers, organ failure, neurological disease, birth defects, mutations, and behavior and learning disabilities. And we talked about some of the learning disabilities and behavior problems earlier. There's just no doubt about this stuff. It's been proven consistently and conclusively over and over again with statistical significance. Doesn't mean all chemicals are bad, but it means you have to be careful and know what you're getting into. And don't believe everything you hear or read. Okay, the second point is the inert alert. I put that there. The EPA doesn't really regulate inerts. What that means is a company can have their pesticide approved and they have a binding agent or an inert ingredient in that pesticide that's not regulated because they say it's not an active ingredient. But the problem is that some of the inerts are actually worse than the pesticides when it comes to human exposure, or the combination of them is worse. There's lots of anecdotal evidence and concrete evidence, again, of people being poisoned and where the inert is actually the bad guy, but the EPA still really doesn't do anything about that. Acquired immunity, that's not so much from a person standpoint, but certainly from an insect standpoint. We're having a lot of the pyrethroids, which are the most common pesticide right now. The synthetic versions, insects are becoming immune to them. So they're not really working. And you'll hear that, especially things like Frontline that you put on your animals to keep the fleas off and so on, isn't working anymore. Some of the similar products. And that's because insects have become immune to them, like they so often do. And the final thing on here is indoor residue. Another study found recently that they just took random homes, didn't ask whether or not they treated, 62% of the homes had pesticide residue in the carpets that the children and the pets are crawling around on and that you're walking on. The problem is when a pesticide is out in the environment, it breaks down in sunlight. When it comes inside on your feet or on your pet, it doesn't break down. It stays there for quite a while. So that's another problem to look for. Now, the neat thing about natural pesticides is that insects never become immune to them. And they're a lot safer. Pesticides and repellents, these are all, you know, once in a while I'll find a person that's allergic to cedar. And sometimes people don't like the smell of garlic. But these are absolutely safe products that you spill on yourself. It's no problem. It might burn a little bit. But garlic is a fantastic repellent. It might kill something if it gets direct contact, but it's not known as a knockdown pesticide. It's more of a repellent. But the great thing about that is it repels over 180, in fact, different insect varieties, from chiggers to mosquitoes to your garden pests, slugs, and so on. The other neat thing about that is that you spray it on and you smell it for about a half a day and then it goes away. And it'll last for about a month. Cedar, peppermint, and botanical enzymes are great as a knockdown killer. Again, they're indiscriminate, so they're going to kill everything. So I don't use that unless you have an infestation problem. But again, the cedar oil, the peppermint, and the botanical enzymes just break through the waxy cuticle of the insect to let the other things do their job. And again, safe. I make repellents for people and animals out of these, let alone as a knockdown for your lawn and garden. And finally, diatomaceous earth, commonly known as DE. Diatoms are a microscopic animal, and this is their skeleton that's left over when they die. And they mine this stuff. And what it does, it's razor sharp to an insect, and it cuts their exoskeleton, and they die of dehydration. So you can sprinkle this in your carpet if you have fleas that your pets have brought in. The fleas will disappear. You can put it in your windowsills and your house flies will disappear. It's just amazing what you can do with it. And it's just a little fine powder, and it's actually food safe. In fact, they put it in flour sometimes to make sure there's no microorganisms in the flour and in livestock feed. Okay, finally, just a couple resources and then I'll take any questions. My website is Thrive Organics, and there's information there, and I'll continue to put more information on there. GetIPM.com is another good website. Now that's a little more radical, and it's going to have lots of stories about poisonings and from all over the world and different information. And then if you just go to a search engine like Bing and search for pesticides, there's lots of resources out there that tell you very scientific information about herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, and what they do to our environment and to people and animals. That's it.
We're not done.
I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
We have a pear tree, and it's frequented by the bees. Mm-hmm. You can't really discriminate, can you, when it comes to garlic, for example?
You can't really discriminate. And if it's time for whatever crop to blossom and to bloom and be pollinated, I wouldn't use it. However, there's no evidence that garlic repels bees. And they use this in row crops and so on. So to be on the safe side, I say don't use it during pollination. Or, you know, it's okay if it's been a couple weeks and it's still there, because it really doesn't affect bees too well. It really messes with heat sensing or other sensing insects like mosquitoes. They tend to be the biting insects. So it actually is kind of selective that way. It turns out pretty neat.
From the lawn care perspective, what insects are you trying to control, or from the backyard environment, what are you trying to control?
The biggest things I believe are the larvae, what am I trying to say? What word am I?
Cutworms?
Yeah, cutworms, any kind of worms in there that bring in moles or that destroy your root system. That's really what the main thing you're trying to control. And then of course, what's it? Grubs, thank you. I just couldn't think of that easy word. Grubs. You get rid of the grubs, you get rid of a lot of problems. And so especially if you apply in the spring, not only will you take care of grubs, make it a hostile environment for them, but you'll also really diminish your mosquitoes for the rest of the year and some of the other things that we don't like to be around.
Now, do I understand the IPM part is integrated pest management?
That's right. That's right.
So do we not understand that there are some beneficial insects like wasps that would attack the larvae and grubs in the soil?
Absolutely.
And our strategy would more be not to run them off, but to give them some food. So you'd want a food source like native plants or flowers to feed them with,
Right.
and say, don't run away, go take care of your business.
Right.
Take care of my yard.
Why are we losing the bee population? Is it from insecticides and pesticides and herbicides?
Well, there's no conclusive evidence. I can't really say for sure this is what it is, but it seems pretty likely that that's why they're disappearing, are pesticides and herbicides.
Is there a way to kill Bermuda grass organically?
If you use, I believe, and I'll have to look at my list to make sure, but there are grasses that tend to be the broader grasses that will be killed by the citric acid product.
Does it smell good?
You know, it actually doesn't really smell. So it's not unpleasant or pleasant, either one. There also is a great general herbicide, just so you know, that's also citric acid based that works fantastically. Like within hours, the plant is dead, and you can just see it. But that's a general. It's going to kill everything you spray it on, including your grass. But if you have that need, there's an organic available there too.
Where can this hydrolyzed fish, how can that be obtained?
Okay, I don't know of anybody who carries it locally. Now that doesn't mean they don't, I just don't know. You can certainly contact me. I'll leave some business cards that you can look at. You can go to Thrive Organics and do that. You can also just search on the web. Neptune's Harvest is the brand that I know. That's a good brand. There are some brands, again, that boil the fish and so on, so it's not as great. I believe there's a product made by the Dram Corporation, D-R-A-M-M, that's out of the Great Lakes that I believe theirs is also cold processed.
And finally, do you do residential spraying?
I do when I have time. I did that for a while, and I'm so busy on the road with educational and other marketing ventures that I just don't have time to be out spraying. But I'm actually, if there's enough demand, I'll find the people to spray. And I will certainly, for those people who don't mind spraying themselves, this stuff is easy to spray yourself, and I'm more than happy to educate you on how to do that and find the product for you.
Meadowthorpe gets a bi-weekly or bi-monthly spraying for mosquitoes. Are we killing ourselves?
Here, I'm going to step on some toes here. Yeah, I think it's very unhealthy, the municipal spraying that goes on. And Canada, for example, has completely outlawed the pyrethrums that they spray aerially, that they used to spray up there, and that they currently spray in the United States. Again, it's a neurotoxin. They'll say it's natural. It's based from chrysanthemum flowers. I think there's enough anecdotal evidence and starting to be more concrete evidence that it's not a great product. And I always wonder, and I've actually asked the health department and others, you know, you have natural products available that are effective. Why not use them? I mean, even if you think this is safe, why take that chance if there's this anecdotal evidence? So,
could you describe what you would consider to be a residential homeowner plan from your company's perspective as far as supplementing or providing especially fertilization and then pesticide, just a typical package that you'd suggest to a homeowner? Sure.
It kind of depends on what you want to do. If you have a lot of weeds or your lawn's not real healthy that you want to kind of get a jump start on things, you want to do kind of what we call a weed buster program, where you would do this weed and feed application 3 times 10 days apart, a week to 10 days apart. So you're really hammering it. Now, it's still not getting really more nitrogen than it needs. It can still use all that nitrogen. But what you're doing is number one, you're really weakening the broadleafs with that herbicide. And number 2, you're really strengthening the root system and the health of your grass turf that's going to take that over. Now,
And the herbicide you're using is citrus-based?
it's citric acid, that's right.
Citric acid.
Yep, and sodium lauryl sulfate, and all of which is on the exempt list. Now, just a maintenance program is generally once a month. Now if it's really hot and dry and things are kind of dormant, you don't apply it. But certainly, if you don't have the weed problem or don't want to do the weed buster program, just once a month, kind of really starting probably mid-March on through the fall.
Now, is that akin to what you described as a lawn on chemical dependence and providing that food along? Because part of what strikes me is looking at the composition of the lawn, and if you've got clovers that are providing nitrogen, would you adjust your plan based on that?
Right, absolutely. Again, that's taking the place of a traditional weed and feed program. If you don't mind having clovers and some dandelions in your lawn and want a healthier lawn, really, with the clovers, then you don't want to do the herbicide. You just want to fertilize. In which case, then you move to, like a worm castings or a fish product, something like that, or something that's a natural product with a low NPK that's water insoluble.
And this may be a little beyond your scope of practice, but if someone had a grass lawn, quote unquote, say it was fescue, and they wanted to move to a more natural and introduce clover, they would do what? They'd aerate and then overseed on
That's
that
exactly
aerated
right.
lawn?
That's exactly right, yes.
Okay, and then get the clover to establish within the turf grass. At that point, they could back off on the applications.
That's right. And done naturally, clover will take, it'll establish itself more and more as years go on. You can certainly do more radical things to get it going, but the vast majority of people will do just that. They'll dethatch and then overseed with the clover seed. One thing I wanted to mention that I forgot in the presentation is one of the most important things you can do, no matter how you treat your lawn, is don't cut the grass too short. Some people want to have a putting green for their lawn, and it really makes for an unhealthy, chemically dependent lawn. And you have lots of weed problems then. You really, especially in the heat of the summer, but you don't want your lawn any shorter than 2.5 inches, and 3 is better. And what that does is it really the grass will naturally keep out a lot of the weeds then if you let it be healthy and taller that way.
I have seen guidance that says 3.5 inch, 4 inch cutting height, and you let it grow an inch and you cut the inch off.
Right. Yeah, you never cut more than 1/3 of the entire height off. And you want to make sure you have sharp blades so you're not shredding your grass basically, but where it's a clean cut. Those are some things that will really help the health and prevent disease. If you have a dull blade and kind of shred the ends of your grass, they're a lot more disease susceptible. So those are all things you can do, and certainly the taller the better, until your neighbors complain.
And while we're in the mowing and maintenance part, from the stormwater protection side of it in the neighborhood, if your grass clippings wind up going out in the street, they need to be picked up and recovered so they don't wind up being in the stormwater. What's your position on mulching mowers?
I think mulching is great because you're adding, that's degrading right back into the soil, adding nutrients to the soil. That's, to me, the best way to mow from both a healthy lawn perspective and from a less work perspective. Now, the thing here, too, you want to mow fairly frequently, even though it's at a taller height, just so you don't get huge clumps of grass out there. That becomes the problem. But if you mow on a regular basis, based on how much is growing, you can keep that to pretty low cover. Thank you.
Thank you.